So when I was 16, I was on my high school debating team. And in that year, to prepare for the provincial tournament, I had to put together and deliver a short, persuasive talk on a topic of my choice. This was in an era much before TED Talks and even before the internet. I decided to talk about a subject that was in the news at the time, the issue of whether women should be allowed into combat units in the Canadian military. For some reason, this issue infuriated me. I thought that fighting for the right to kill other human beings was the most ridiculous thing ever. It seemed to me at the time that women wanted to do it just because men could. Why not fight for the right to live in a society in which no one had to fight wars? So in a moment of great passion and great idealism, and in retrospect, much oversimplification, I summoned up the analogy of walking into a brick wall. If we lived in a society in which only men could walk into brick walls, would women want to do that too? What about working together to declare brick wall walking a destructive thing that no one should have to do? Well, I went off to the tournament and I gave my talk, and despite coming in second, I kind of returned from the tournament and my feminism quickly went underground. Okay. Fast forward about 30 years, and here I am delivering another short, persuasive talk on a topic of my choice. But today, I'm not going to be talking about walking into brick walls or about women in the Canadian military. I am going to talk to you about the F word, feminism. For in retrospect, I realized that that moment was the first time in my life I had ever thought about an issue in feminist terms. Let's call that feminist moment number one. Okay. As I say, that feminism quickly went underground. I went off to university, I took Psych 101, and I was hooked. I took abnormal psychology and social psychology and history of psychology, and for my honors thesis, I devised a way to measure the role of empathy in fostering cooperative behavior. I think I was still thinking about ending war. Okay? Then I decided that I would pursue graduate work in clinical psychology. And it wasn't until graduate school that I encountered the F word again. This time I had to bring it up myself. I was taking a seminar on theories of therapy. Okay? We had to pick a theory from the syllabus and present a seminar. So these were theories like psychoanalytic theories and cognitive behavioral theories, humanistic theories, and so on. The F word was nowhere to be seen. Okay? So I approached my prof and I asked him if I could give my seminar on feminist therapy, a form of therapy that helps clients see their problems as not arising only from factors within themselves, but also as embedded in the social systems in which they lived. He obliged, and I gave my seminar on feminist therapy. But again, that quickly went underground. Let's call that feminist moment number two. I promptly returned to what I was doing, which was becoming more and more interested in the history of psychology. Just as I was learning to take detailed clinical case histories of the clients that I hoped to help, so too was I becoming fascinated by the history of the discipline of psychology itself. As I was digging into my clients' pasts for clues as to the current problems, I thought, what clues can the past of the discipline of psychology offer us for understanding how we collectively make sense of ourselves and each other? So I turned increasingly to the history of psychology. And even though I did become a clinical psychologist, I took a position as a professor in the History and Theory of Psychology graduate program here in the Department of Psychology at York. This program is one of the few places in the world where psychology students can pursue advanced study in historical and theoretical issues in psychology. But it wasn't until I had been a prof here at York for many years, that I had my third feminist moment. I had been studying how psychological theories like behaviorism, for example, affects people's everyday lives. How do theories like behaviorism, for example, move from the laboratory into everyday life in places like hospitals and clinics and schools and even self-help? Well, it occurred to me that that psychologists have always studied one of the most primary ways that we understand ourselves and each other, and that is gender, through gender. Okay? Psychological theories of gender have existed since the beginning of the discipline. Some of these theories have been influenced by feminism. So as it was all coming together in my mind, I thought maybe I could study the influence of feminism on psychological theories of gender and how those theories have come to influence the society in which we live and how we see each other as gendered human beings. Okay? Let's call that feminist moment number 3. Okay? So one of the things that psychologists have done ever since the beginning of the discipline, okay, is study how men and women are different. Okay? Many of these studies of male-female sex differences have drawn upon, supported, and reinforced traditional gender stereotypes. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, for example. But from very early in psychology's history, since the late 19th and early 20th century, there have been dissenting voices. Many of these voices came from women who questioned the existing psychological research on sex differences, and they did their own studies. Sometimes they found no differences at all, and even when they did find sex differences, they questioned whether those differences could be attributed to biology, given that men's and women's environments varied so much. Many of these women, early in psychology's history, would have called themselves feminists. Okay? They were involved in feminist causes outside the discipline and so on. But it wasn't until the 1970s that a self-consciously feminist psychology arose and took hold in the United States and Canada. At that time, many feminists who were also psychologists during the second wave of the women's movement began to look at psychology, and they noticed a couple of things. One of the things they noticed was that most of the psychological research to date had been by men and on men. The findings were generalized to women despite this fact. Okay? So they called upon the discipline to include women in research studies, to do more research on women's unique experiences, and to do more sensitive and contextual studies of sex differences and even similarities. Okay? So one of the things that I do now is I study the relationship between psychology and feminism and its impact on society. One way of getting at this is to interview people who combine their feminism with their psychology. Okay? So one of the things I and my research team have done is to interview feminist psychologists. We interview them to understand how they became feminists, the impact of feminism on their work, and how that sometimes challenges ideas that we have about how you do science. Okay? My research team and I have now conducted over 100 interviews, and they are all available on the project website, Psychology's Feminist Voices. Okay? I want to share with you one of the things that one of our interview participants told us. For while all of them see their feminism as combining seamlessly with their work as psychologists, other people don't see that fit as quite so seamless. So she told us that, I can't imagine being a psychologist in any other way. Okay? But there are microaggressions against feminism and feminist psychology. For example, one of her colleagues said to her, maybe for the next few years, in order to get tenure, you should act more like a man. Or maybe you shouldn't publish so much in journals that have titles with the word women in them. And my personal favorite, don't use the word breast so much in your work on breast cancer. Okay? So in addition to interviewing feminist psychologists about the impact of feminism on their work, I'm also really interested in the impact of feminist psychology on society. One of my current projects looks at the history and reception of the 1 in 5 statistic. Okay? The 1 in 5 statistic refers to the number of women on college campuses who have experienced attempted or completed sexual assault. This statistic was originally formulated in a nationally representative survey by psychologist Mary Koss in the mid-1980s. Okay? In her work, she asked women to endorse whether they had experienced the behavioral definition of completed or attempted sexual assault according to the legal definition at the time. And what she found was that among those women who endorsed the behavioral definition, very few of them endorsed the item that was phrased, "I have experienced rape." Okay. What she also found was that the majority of these women reported that their experience of sexual assault had been perpetrated by a date or an acquaintance. Mary Koss's work brought date rape into national prominence, and as you can imagine, it was incredibly controversial. Some people accused her of making up an experience that didn't exist, while other people used her work as the basis for more empirical study and changes in sexual assault policy. Okay? So I'm really interested in the way that feminist psychology is both taken up and resisted in the society of which both feminism and psychology form a part. So this brings me to my final feminist moment. Okay? I am a feminist psychologist because I believe that feminism and psychology together have created a better society than either has on its own. From better psychosocial support for women with breast cancer to more sophisticated sexual assault policy. I also believe that being open about the kind of society to which you want your work to contribute is an important part of being a good psychologist, even if that means you have to use the F word a lot.